The story of Moses is not just a tale preserved in the dusty scrolls of antiquity, but a living manual of wisdom, power, and spiritual law. He was not merely a prophet, not merely a leader, not merely a man of faith, but a vessel chosen to reveal eternal principles that govern life, destiny, and success. His life is a portrait painted with the brushstrokes of courage, patience, discipline, and unwavering faith in the unseen. To understand the wisdom of Moses is to uncover truths that, when applied, can transform ordinary existence into extraordinary achievement. His wisdom was not theory, it was practice. It was not speculation, it was revelation lived out in action. Consider the birth of Moses, born in a time of oppression, when Pharaoh's decree was that every male child of the Hebrews should be cast into the Nile. His very survival was a defiance of the forces arrayed against him. His mother's courage, placing him in a basket among the reeds, his sister's vigilance, and Pharaoh's daughter's compassion, all converged in a single lesson. Destiny will always find a way when faith and courage hold steady. From the beginning, Moses' life reminds us that no decree of man can destroy what the hand of God has purposed. The wisdom in this is simple. When your life is rooted in purpose, even enemies become unwitting instruments for your protection. Moses grew in Pharaoh's palace, educated in the wisdom of Egypt, trained among the elite, and prepared in worldly knowledge, yet within him stirred an identity he could not escape. The wisdom here is profound. You may be placed in the palace of another, trained in the schools of men, influenced by cultures not your own, but your true calling will eventually rise and demand recognition. There is always a voice that whispers, reminding you of who you really are, and wisdom is not in denying that voice, but in listening to it, following it, and obeying it, even when it requires sacrifice. Moses' first great decision came when he saw the suffering of his people. Though he lived as a prince, he chose to identify with slaves. This is not a small thing. It is easy to remain comfortable in borrowed privilege, to ignore injustice when it does not touch your skin, to enjoy luxuries while others bleed. But wisdom rejects false comfort. Moses chose affliction with his people rather than luxury with his oppressors. His choice tells us that greatness always demands the courage to step away from the easy path. Real wisdom is knowing that comfort is temporary, but calling is eternal. Yet Moses stumbled. He killed an Egyptian taskmaster in anger and fled into exile. Here is another lesson of wisdom. Zeal without discipline can ruin destiny. Passion unguided by principle leads to mistakes. But even in exile, even in failure, wisdom works. Moses found refuge in Midian, married, and tended sheep for 40 years. Imagine the humility of a man once raised in palaces, now herding animals in wilderness silence. But the wisdom here is invaluable. Before you can lead people, you must learn to lead yourself. Before you can shepherd a nation, you must know what it is to shepherd flocks. Before you can carry the burden of divine calling, you must be emptied of pride and trained in patience. Then came the burning bush, the great moment of encounter, a flame that burned but did not consume, a voice from the fire that declared, "Take off your shoes, for the ground you stand on is holy." This moment holds timeless wisdom. Life has burning bushes everywhere, moments of divine interruption, sudden awakenings, encounters that shake you out of ordinary perception. The wisdom is to recognize them, to stop and turn aside, and to listen. Too many pass by their burning bushes, too busy to notice, too hardened to believe, too distracted to hear. Wisdom calls us to stop, to humble ourselves, to recognize that certain moments are holy, certain places are sacred, and certain instructions change the course of destiny forever. Moses argued with the voice. He doubted himself, feared rejection, and felt inadequate. He said, "I am slow of speech." And here lies another jewel of wisdom. No man is called because he is perfect. God does not choose the flawless but the willing. Where you see weakness, God sees opportunity. Where you see limitation, heaven provides provision. Moses was given Aaron as a helper, a rod as a symbol, and miracles as a seal. The wisdom is that when the call is genuine, the resources will come. Your excuses may be many, but destiny demands obedience, not perfection. He returned to Egypt not as the timid fugitive who fled, but as a prophet carrying authority. Standing before Pharaoh, he declared, "Let my people go." What boldness it takes to stand before the greatest empire of the time and speak truth to power! Wisdom reminds us that authority is not in the throne, not in the crown, not in the armies, but in the voice that carries divine backing. When you carry conviction rooted in truth, no Pharaoh can silence you. The plagues that followed Egypt reveal a dimension of wisdom often overlooked. Each plague was not random. It was a direct challenge to the false gods of Egypt. The Nile turned to blood mocked their river god. The frogs, lice, and flies mocked their idols of fertility and creation. Darkness mocked Ra, their sun god, and the death of the firstborn broke the pride of Pharaoh himself, who claimed divine sonship. The wisdom here is sharp. Truth will always expose deception. False powers crumble when confronted with reality. What men worship as unshakable, wisdom proves fragile. Then came the Red Sea. Trapped between Pharaoh's army and the water, the people cried out in fear. And Moses declared words that echo through time, "Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." The wisdom here is eternal. When faced with impossible barriers, panic achieves nothing, fear paralyzes, but faith opens the sea. Wisdom teaches that the way out is often invisible until courage takes the first step. The sea did not part while they stood at a distance. It parted when Moses stretched forth the rod and the people walked forward. Wisdom requires action. Belief without movement is powerless. Faith that does not step is no faith at all. The wilderness journey was perhaps the greatest classroom of wisdom. The people complained, longed for Egypt, rebelled, doubted, and feared. Yet manna fell from heaven, water came from the rock, and guidance came from the pillar of cloud and fire. The wisdom here is patience. Progress is not instant. Freedom requires discipline. Deliverance from slavery is one thing. Deliverance from a slave mindset is another. Moses endured their murmuring, interceded on their behalf, and bore the weight of leadership. True wisdom understands that people are not transformed overnight. Leaders must guide with firmness and compassion, patience and persistence. On Sinai, Moses ascended into the thick cloud of glory and received the 10 Commandments. The wisdom of these commands has endured thousands of years, shaping civilizations, laws, and moral codes. They are not mere religious rules. They are eternal principles of life. Do not murder, do not steal, do not covet, honor parents, honor God. These are not restrictions but protections. They are the foundation of order, justice, and harmony. Wisdom recognizes that freedom without law is chaos, and law without morality is tyranny. The wisdom of Moses was in balancing freedom with responsibility, but perhaps the most profound wisdom of Moses was humility. Though he worked miracles, split seas, and spoke with God face to face, he remained described as the meekest man on earth. Wisdom teaches that true greatness is not in exalting oneself but in serving others. Leaders who exalt themselves crumble. Leaders who serve endure. Moses interceded for a rebellious people even when they wished to stone him. He pleaded for mercy even when judgment was deserved. Wisdom is not only power, it is compassion. Moses did not enter the promised land. His journey ended on Mount Nebo, where he saw the land from afar but did not step in. Some might call this a tragedy, but wisdom sees deeper. His mission was not possession but preparation. His work was not to enter but to lead others to the threshold. This final act of his life teaches us one of the greatest lessons of wisdom. Success is not always personal fulfillment, but the fulfillment of purpose. Sometimes the seeds you plant will grow in the lives of others. Sometimes the vision you see will be walked by future generations. Wisdom accepts this with grace. The wisdom of Moses, therefore, is a living heritage. It is the wisdom of identity, of choosing calling over comfort, of discipline over zeal, of humility over pride, of faith over fear, of patience over panic, of law over lawlessness, of service over self, and of purpose over possession. To apply his wisdom is to rise above excuses, to embrace divine calling, to walk boldly before pharaohs of our time, to trust when the sea has not yet parted, to endure the wilderness of delay, to honor the law of higher order, to lead with humility, and to accept that legacy matters more than luxury. His wisdom was not bound to his time. It transcends ages. It speaks to leaders, dreamers, visionaries, and seekers of truth. It whispers to the oppressed that liberation is possible. It warns the arrogant that power without righteousness crumbles. It directs the wanderer that guidance is always near, and it calls every soul to recognize their burning bush, to heed the voice, and to walk the path of destiny. The ancient wisdom of Moses is not history. It is prophecy lived, truth revealed, and guidance preserved. To walk in it is to walk in the timeless rhythm of divine order. It is to live not as a slave to circumstance, but as a vessel of purpose. It is to believe that seas will part, manna will fall, rocks will yield water, and mountains will reveal law, when one walks in alignment with the eternal. This is the wisdom that built nations, freed captives, humbled kings, and shaped the conscience of humanity. The wisdom of Moses stretches further than the boundaries of his own time, for each moment of his life is a parable for those who seek truth today. His journey was not simply about leading a people from one land to another. It was about leading humanity from ignorance into knowledge, from despair into hope, from bondage into freedom. To look at Moses only as a historical figure is to miss the living pulse of his example. The wisdom in his story speaks to the depths of the human spirit, calling us to recognize that within every person lies a calling greater than their fears, and a purpose greater than their present circumstances. The strength of Moses did not come from his own might, but from his unbroken connection with the divine source. This is perhaps his greatest secret. His wisdom was not the wisdom of men, not the philosophies of his age, not the sciences of Egypt, though he knew them all. His wisdom flowed from communion, from listening to a voice higher than his own, from following instructions even when they seemed irrational. What man, after all, would strike a rock expecting water to flow? What man would raise a rod expecting seas to part? What man would trust bread to fall from the sky? But wisdom is the ability to act with confidence in what is unseen because it aligns with a law greater than human understanding. The lesson is that all true leaders, all true seekers of greatness, must cultivate this same communion with their higher purpose, this same listening ear for guidance that transcends logic. In every age there are pharaohs who boast of their power, enslaving through fear, through systems, through voices that say you cannot rise above your circumstances. Yet the wisdom of Moses proves that no pharaoh is eternal, no empire invincible, and no chains unbreakable. The same wisdom that freed Israel can free the modern soul from the prisons of doubt, addiction, fear, limitation, and conformity. The chains today may not be iron, but they are often strong chains of hopeless thinking, chains of self-sabotage, chains of believing the world has the final word. The wisdom of Moses shatters them all, reminding us that the Red Seas of life part not for the strongest, but for the obedient, and there is also the wisdom of waiting. How often we want the promise without the process, the destination without the journey, the crown without the cross. Yet Moses 40 years in the wilderness before returning to Egypt, and then another 40 years leading his people, remind us that timing is essential. Wisdom is not rushing ahead of destiny nor lagging behind it. Wisdom is moving in step with the eternal rhythm of time. Patience is not weakness, but power under control. The world glorifies speed, but wisdom glorifies alignment. Moses was not late, though 80, when he stood before Pharaoh. He was precisely on time because destiny unfolds at its appointed hour. Finally, the wisdom of Moses is a challenge to each of us. Just as he had a burning bush, so does every person have moments where eternity touches time, where the ordinary becomes extraordinary, where a voice calls to rise higher than fear. The question is whether we turn aside to see, whether we remove the shoes of pride and self-sufficiency, whether we dare to listen. For wisdom is not in the hearing alone, but in the doing, not in admiration of great figures, but in application of their principles. The legacy of Moses is not meant to be admired from a distance, but lived in our decisions, our faith, our courage, and our service to others. To embrace his wisdom is to recognize that life itself is holy ground, that every step is a calling, and that with faith, courage, patience, and humility, we too can lead ourselves and others from bondage into the freedom of purpose fulfilled. The life of Moses is a river of wisdom that does not dry up, for each bend of his journey carries a lesson that mirrors our own struggles. When he stood before Pharaoh, it was not merely the confrontation of two men. It was the timeless battle between truth and oppression, faith and arrogance, light and darkness. The wisdom is that every generation will face its Pharaoh, and every individual will be summoned to speak truth to power in some form. The Pharaoh may not always be a king. Sometimes it is the fear within, the habit that enslaves, the doubt that mocks your dream. To rise like Moses is to look the Pharaoh of your life in the eye and declare, "Let me go." It is to demand your own freedom from whatever has bound you. In guiding the people, Moses showed that leadership is not the art of pleasing everyone, but the art of holding to vision even when the crowd resists. His people often longed to return to Egypt, preferring the familiarity of bondage over the uncertainty of freedom. And yet Moses pressed on, teaching us that wisdom never bows to the complaints of the crowd. It listens with compassion, but leads with conviction. Greatness requires enduring misunderstanding, even rejection. If you wait for unanimous approval, you will never move forward. Moses walked forward with the cloud and the fire as his guide, and the wisdom is that true direction comes not from popular vote, but from divine purpose. The miracles in the desert were also symbols of deeper truth. Manna taught dependence, that daily bread is sufficient for each day. The rock that gave water revealed that provision often comes from the most unlikely sources. The pillar of fire and cloud showed that guidance is always present, even in the darkest nights and hottest days. Each miracle was wisdom disguised in wonder, teaching lessons for those who had eyes to see. Too often we crave miracles but miss the wisdom they contain. We look for signs but fail to ask what they signify. The wisdom of Moses reveals that every provision, every breakthrough, every answered prayer carries within it a lesson, a principle to be lived, not just an event to be admired. Even the failures of Moses are part of his wisdom. When in frustration he struck the rock instead of speaking to it, he was denied entry to the promised land. This seems harsh, yet it reveals the sacredness of obedience. Wisdom teaches that leaders are held to higher standards, that responsibility increases with revelation, and that anger, even when justified, can rob us of blessings if not mastered. The lesson is sobering but vital. Power must always be tempered with discipline. Authority without self-control leads to downfall. Moses' error warns us that even the greatest are not above the law of discipline. And as he stood on Mount Nebo, looking across to the land he had long pursued but could not enter, his story reached its final note of wisdom. Life is not measured by what you personally gain, but by what you set in motion for others. Wisdom is building paths that generations yet unborn will walk upon. Moses did not step into Canaan, but his leadership ensured that millions did. His legacy was not in possession, but in preparation, not in arrival, but in faithfulness, and this truth echoes across time. Your greatest success may not be seen in your lifetime, but in the fruit of seeds you faithfully plant today. Thus the wisdom of Moses is not confined to Scripture, nor locked in history, but alive in every person who dares to rise above fear, obey a higher call, endure the wilderness of growth, and live for a purpose greater than themselves. It calls you to courage, to patience, to humility, and to faith that transforms obstacles into opportunities, deserts into classrooms, and ordinary lives into legacies that endure. The ancient wisdom of Moses is also found in his endurance, for he bore the weight of leadership longer than most men could bear. Think of 40 years guiding a people who resisted him, questioned him, and often turned against him. Many would have abandoned the task, yet Moses pressed forward, not because of their approval, but because of his allegiance to his calling. The wisdom here is that perseverance is not dependent on applause. True perseverance is rooted in conviction that transcends mood and moment. To follow the example of Moses is to understand that purpose will test your endurance, stretch your patience, and expose your heart. But in pressing forward, you are refined into the vessel capable of carrying the vision. Consider also the transformation of Moses himself. From a man who fled Egypt in fear, to a leader who stood unshaken before Pharaoh, to one who conversed with the divine in the silence of the mountain, his life reveals that no person is fixed in weakness. Wisdom teaches that fear can be transformed into courage, hesitation into boldness, and doubt into unshakable conviction when one yields to the process of growth. The burning bush did not change Egypt immediately, but it changed Moses, and that change in one man shifted the destiny of a nation. The wisdom here is that transformation begins within, and the inner change is always the seed of outer change. Even the laws given through Moses carry layers of wisdom beyond their words. They were not arbitrary commands, but guiding principles meant to shape character, community, and destiny. Honor for parents ensured generational respect. Rest on the Sabbath preserved balance between labor and renewal. The prohibition against coveting taught contentment, a shield against envy's destruction. Each command was both practical and spiritual, training the people to live not merely as freed slaves, but as a holy nation. The wisdom is that freedom without guidance collapses into chaos, but structure rooted in truth creates harmony. Modern life may dismiss these ancient principles, yet their power remains. Societies thrive when truth is honored, justice upheld, and integrity cherished. The intimacy Moses shared with the divine is also a profound lesson. Scripture records that he spoke face to face, as a man speaks to his friend. This teaches that wisdom is not merely knowledge acquired, but relationship cultivated. Moses sought counsel, asked questions, and listened deeply. He carried the presence with him, refusing to move unless guided by it. His wisdom was not independent reasoning alone, but dependent communion with a higher source. In this we learn that the highest wisdom comes not from prideful certainty, but from humility that listens. And when Moses blessed the tribes before his departure, his words carried the weight of vision for futures he would not personally see. He spoke life into generations beyond his own, leaving an inheritance of words that outlived his years. The wisdom here is that legacy is not built on possessions, but on the truths and blessings we leave behind. Words, when filled with wisdom, outlast monuments, wealth, and power. Moses teaches us to invest in what endures, to plant wisdom like seeds that grow in the hearts of those who follow. In all of this, the wisdom of Moses calls us higher. It reminds us that life's trials are classrooms, that leadership demands humility, that freedom requires responsibility, and that true greatness lies not in what we take for ourselves, but in what we give for the sake of others. To walk in his wisdom is to align with eternal law, to stand firm against fear, to endure the wilderness with patience, and to finish our journey with the satisfaction that we have been faithful to the purpose placed in our hands. The wisdom of Moses is not a relic to be admired from afar, but a living torch handed down through the ages, inviting each of us to walk in its light. His life shows us that no obstacle is too great when faith is steadfast, no failure too final when humility is embraced, and no calling too heavy when obedience is chosen. From the palace to the wilderness, from the burning bush to Sinai, from the Red Sea to Mount Nebo, Moses revealed that life's journey is not about ease, but about alignment with purpose. His legacy is a reminder that greatness is not measured by comfort or possession, but by courage, service, discipline, and trust in the unseen. If we dare to embrace his wisdom, we too can rise above fear, lead with conviction, and live lives that echo far beyond our own years. This is the enduring power of the ancient wisdom of Moses, timeless, transformative, and waiting for those willing to live it.